Our first reading today comes from the account of the fall of the human race from Genesis 3. Certainly encourage you. I did our Lenten talks this Lent on the creation and fall account. So if you didn't have a chance to hear those, check those out on the website, because it is a very, very important part of salvation history, and it shapes our whole worldview as Christians. So I encourage you to check those out if you haven't already. But in today's reading, we hear the immediate effects from the fall. And at the end of the creation account in Genesis 2, it said that after God had created the first man and the first woman, that they were naked without shame. Our first parents were created in a state that we call original innocence. They were able to look at each other with absolute purity and innocence, without any fear of embarrassment or any fear of lust or sin entering. They were able to look at each other with complete purity and innocence. And then we hear immediately after they commit the sin of disobedience against God that they realized that they were naked and they hid themselves. So what's the significance of that? Well, that state of original innocence was shattered, that openness where they were able to look at each other with absolute purity, and not just between each other, but there was also a spiritual reality of innocence between them and God. They were able to reveal themselves completely and totally to God. They didn't have to hide any thought that came into their mind or any desire that came into their mind they knew was pleasing to God. And so there was no need for them to be ashamed of anything or to be embarrassed about anything. So there was this state of harmony between them and God and between each other. And immediately after the fall, disorder entered into their hearts and into their minds. And so we hear in the first reading how one of the first things they do is they hide themselves. They hide their bodies because the way that they view each other is now corrupted and they're not able to see each other in that original innocence. But also, they hide themselves from God because now they have something that they're ashamed of, that they're embarrassed about. They could no longer stand before God with an open heart and a relationship of complete and total love. Like a child, in the presence of their parents. There's this innocence there. That innocence was shattered with Adam and Eve. And now they wanted to hide from him because they knew they had disobeyed him. Their desires were corrupted, and they didn't want to reveal the darkness and the sin that was within them. It made them now uncomfortable to be in the presence of God. And so they not only turned against God, but they turned against each other. And they started blaming each other for their sin instead of taking responsibility for it themselves. And so we hear God ask a very fitting question of Adam. He says, "Where are you?" And certainly he's not just asking where is his physical location, because God is omniscient, he knows that. But what he's asking Adam is, what's happened to you? Where is your heart? Why are you hiding from me? From God's perspective, why is my own son, who I created in an act of love and put in a state of paradise into Eden, why is he now hiding from me in fear and in shame? Where are you? And I think we can ask the same question today of ourselves. Where are we? Where is that relationship of complete and total innocence and harmony between us and God that we were created for? Why do we so often hide from God in fear and shame? Why is our relationship with our Heavenly Father disordered? Why are so many people afraid to even come to church? If you've ever tried to invite somebody to church who's a fallen away Catholic or someone who doesn't practice the faith, it's like pulling teeth to get them to come to church. And even many Catholics don't want to come to church. And to get them here is extremely difficult. We should be running to church because we desire to be in the presence of our Heavenly Father, whom we love above all things. How come such disorder has entered into the relationship that the God we should love above all things we're afraid of? And we want to stay away from. People are afraid they'll be judged. Or they're afraid that God might see them with their sinfulness and the things that they're ashamed of. Or people are afraid that they might have to change the way that they live. And so they stay away from God's presence. How many people fear going to the sacrament of confession? They fear confessing their sins in the presence of their loving God who desires to show them mercy and to heal them. But we're afraid because our notion of who God is and our relationship with him has become so corrupted. And even people who come to Mass frequently very often keep a superficial relationship with God. They keep a healthy distance so that what happens at Mass doesn't really get into their heart and transform them. They can kind of keep God at a distance and keep everything superficial. But the reality is that God sees the innermost depths of our soul. He knows every thought and every desire within us. And so often we try and hide from him and keep him out of areas of our life as if he's an enemy, without seeing who he truly is as the loving Father who created us. The mission of Jesus Christ is to reconcile us to the Father, to heal the wounded and broken relationship between us and God, to restore that to the innocence that it once was created for. That's the purpose of his death on the cross, to reconcile us to our Heavenly Father. In today's gospel, he says, "Here are my mothers and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my mother and my brother." He's reaching out to us and trying to reestablish that relationship that we were created for by teaching us the path of holiness and obedience to our Heavenly Father and by breaking down the barrier of sin. And so our path to regain that relationship that we were created for is through Jesus Christ. And so I encourage you to come to Eucharistic adoration and spend time in God's presence, because it takes time for us to open up inwardly and to allow God to see us as we truly are. Because we all have areas of our life that we don't want him to see. If we just screamed at our spouse or committed some sin, it's hard to come into the Lord's presence and to face that. But it takes a lot of trust for us to reestablish that relationship. And it takes time for us to open up on a deeper and deeper level to allow God to see us as we truly are. But the goal, if we look at the saints in heaven, their innocence is completely and totally restored. They live in the presence of God and they see him face to face in complete openness and in complete harmony, body and soul, with their loving Creator. And their sins are no longer a source of shame, but they've been purified in the blood of Christ. They've been shown mercy, and they now rejoice in the mercy that's been shown to them. And they can see themselves through the eyes of their Heavenly Father, without shame or without embarrassment, but seeing themselves as sons and daughters of God as they were created to be. This restoration of human nature is our goal, and that's the mission of Jesus Christ. And it begins by us overcoming fear and placing our trust in our Heavenly Father and opening ourselves inwardly to the gaze of our Heavenly Father, placing ourselves in the presence of the Eucharist. And it takes time, and it's not easy to do. But if we build that relationship of trust and open ourselves more and more deeply, then one day we'll be able to stand before our Heavenly Father without any fear, without any embarrassment, or without any shame. And we can realize the dignity that we were created for as sons and daughters of God.